The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Sorry we had a little bit of problems trying to get connected tonight, but electronics sometimes does things like that, and it happens when you least expect it. We got a great show tonight, though, so I hope everybody enjoys it. And tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan. Maybe.
I'm here and unmuted.
And unmuted. And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we got Tabby Catgash.
How you doing?
And Jeff, you want to introduce our guest real quick?
Yes, considering we're a quarter into the show. Tonight's guest is a returning guest is Keven McQueen. He's born in Richmond, Kentucky. He's an instructor in the Department of English and Theater, in the Easterm Kentucky University, and the author of several books covering such topics as history, biography, historical true crime, natural disasters, folklore, and ghostlore. He spends his free time perfecting his vocal impersonations of the cartoon character Droopy Dog. So welcome back, Keven McQueen. Yay!
Hello, hello. Glad to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad everybody's back too.
And be on the air.
And we also might say that
Kevin
has the most awesome one-liners in Facebook.
Oh, he does.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sometimes they're two-liners.
If you do not know Keven McQueen, he's been on the show quite a few times. We always have a good time with him. But you can follow him on his Facebook page. He's always coming up with stuff. He's hilarious. So tonight we wanted to talk some about one of your older books because your new one's not out yet. We thought it was going to be out in time for the show, but it's not. So we chose Cruelly Murdered, and there's some good stories in here. When you do...
There is, but yeah, can we talk about his... Because I'm really curious now, Keven, as to when you got the writing bug in your life. Were you always just writing things down all the time, or did one day you discovered that you were a writer?
Well, I have been writing things as far back as I can remember, which is a really strange thing in a way, because when I was a kid, I wrote fiction. It wasn't good, but it was fictional stories with made-up characters, and eventually I sort of totally outgrew that and started writing about true incidents and found that I was really better at that, which is too bad because fiction's where the real money is, but you can only do what you can do.
True. Was it like science fiction, or was it just like novel type?
Just sort of little stories about monsters and things. So I guess even then I had sort of a taste for monsters and paranormal and supernatural, but eventually started turning to the true incidents, not the made-up ones.
And so you turned that into a career in teaching, correct?
Yes. I teach English, literature, and composition.
And the theater part?
Well, I'm not really part of the theater department. It's the English department and theater department are conjoined at Eastern, but I don't teach theater.
Got it.
I don't think I could, really.
It's a whole different kind of writing altogether. Yeah.
Oh, it definitely is, and I'm certainly no actor. Never could be, never will be.
Well, like I said, from your Facebook posts, you are definitely a comic.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Definitely.
I'm funnier on paper, I think. But thanks, I appreciate it.
Sometimes that's the case. I was always a fan of Paul Reiser, and I read his book, which was hilarious. and I got his audiobook, and he did the writing, and I figured he would pace it like he was doing his stand-up, and he just read it as dry, and it was just painful to listen to.
Wow.
Huh. At least like Rita Rudner's book, when she read hers, she did it like she was doing stand-up, so it was hilarious. So
Yeah, that's
maybe
kind of what you expect.
you should try an audiobook. There you go.
Somebody actually offered to let me do one once, and then I never heard from them again. I'm not sure why.
You got you on the phone? Oh wait.
No, I was one of my earlier books, Offbeat Kentuckians, was someone contacted me and wanted me to do an audio book, and I was really all for it, although I really think they should get a professional to do the reading, but I never heard from the person again, so I don't know what happened.
Huh.
Well, you have a wonderful voice. I don't know why you think you wouldn't be professional. You have a beautiful voice. I think it would be very pleasing to listen to.
I really, really appreciate that because, to be honest, I hate my voice. I really do. I don't even have terribly long lectures in class because I just can't stand to hear myself. So that's a compliment I will definitely treasure.
Oh, definitely. Thank you.
Well, this
Now,
Do you apologize to your class before you start speaking? Or?
Well, I've been known to apologize to them before, but not for the voice.
Oh.
Well, I guess they most classes with COVID were done via Zoom call. So there's a recording of you out there somewhere. You could use that as your demo tape.
Well, it is true. I had a few in-person classes, but not many, just with very few students, with everybody wearing a mask and sitting 6 feet apart. But for the first time in my life, the last semester or two, I also did Zoom classes, which was a new experience for me, and I'm just awful with technology anyway, so it took me a while to figure out how to do it.
Wow.
I'm not even sure they were recorded, although I know you can record them.
Mm-hmm. Well, you'd have to push that record button.
Oh, that's how you do it.
And depending on
There
the
should be a record button there.
oh yeah, but also depending on the call, sometimes you may have to ask permission. My writing workshops are done from Zoom for the past year or so, and if they're doing a table read, they always have to say, "Is everybody okay with it being recorded?" Because sometimes actors get squirrely about that.
Oh. The last thing I want is to be recorded on Zoom and so people can watch it over and over and over.
So it's funny because I noticed that when Henry was trying to get the show started, you turned on your camera for a moment.
Yes, I did, because, again, technological incompetence. It took me a few minutes to figure out how to get that picture off there. I hope nobody in the audience could see that.
No, they couldn't. We wasn't connected.
The thing is I was doing a search for things like on Mary Magdalene Pitts, and the little square, I look up and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, there's video. I'm like, oh, that's Keven. But I didn't have it full screen, or I would have done a screenshot, and then you would have been,
No. I'm so glad that you didn't. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I almost used for the banner this week. There's a shot of you on Facebook holding an axe.
Oh, nice.
And, it ties in very nicely with the book, The Cruelly Murder.
Lots of goofy pictures of me on Facebook.
So you don't want to imply his books are a hatchet job.
Oh,
Very
boo.
true.
Wow.
Boo.
Well, now,
We'll save that for the critics.
when you
know you
start,
can-
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I know you can Google images of yourself, but I don't dare do it because I have no idea what's going to turn up. All kinds of silly things.
When you go to do, well, now a lot of your books deals with you looking up headline or the tombstone epitaphs and the story then. When you look up these kind of stories, because a lot of them was back in the late 1800s, how hard is it to find those and then the backstory of everything that goes with it?
It's actually surprisingly easy if you're willing to do some work at it. If the nice thing is that if you know when it happened and where it happened, you can find newspapers on microfilm. And very often, interlibrary loan will let you borrow film from small towns or large cities. Most libraries have got some microfilm. Where I teach, fortunately, has a very good collection. And if you look through the back, you'll see a lot of things I do come from the Louisville Courier-Journal. I finally got newspapers.com, which will no doubt help even more once I start my next one. But again, technological incompetence. I haven't quite figured out how to work it exactly right. But anyway, as long as you know the date something happened, you can get the microfilm newspaper, or you can go to newspapers.com, and you'll have a really good idea. You can get the stories. And small town papers are always better, because they know the people involved the best, and you'll always get details from small papers that you won't get from large papers.
Wow.
Right.
They sort of editorialize it just enough to make it more of a story than just flat out news.
Yeah, they will often make remarks in their editorial pages. On the other hand, sometimes they obviously don't want to step on the toes of any local people, and they'll leave out details that the larger, farther away papers will include. You really need to get all of them. And if you do that, you'll find enough stuff to get a good story.
Now, in this one here, the first story, some strange murders in Kentucky. The first one I thought was really interesting. Had some great stuff in it. And I guess it was about Isaac Disha, who escaped the noose 5 times. Now, it's not like he went out and did something and got off and then went out and did something else. He was in jail pretty much the whole time during this.
Yeah. And what made it really interesting was he was the governor's son.
Right.
And so, of course, everyone kept saying, well, politics are at work here. That's why he keeps staying in jail and not going on trial. And when he finally went to trial, he just won. He was almost hanged 5 times. And finally, he was let out and he went to Texas, where he ended up killing someone else, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I've read this one, but I think it's what happened. But there was enough suspicion about it that it ruined the governor's career.
Well, yeah, it sounds like he was, just definitely covering up for the fact that his son was really a bad seed, and just pulled a lot of strings to keep his son from, having to walk to the gallows.
Oh, right. That's exactly what everybody thought back in the 1820s, I think was 1823, 1824, something like that. That's what everyone at the time thought, and they were probably right, because it was pretty obvious that he did it. There really wasn't much reasonable doubt.
Yeah. Now when he started out, he was only, 19?
Something like that, yeah.
Well, actually, he was younger than that when he actually started doing stuff, but I guess with these crimes, he was about 19, 18 or something like that when he started. I kind of liked it that you found out where he was, where he lived. I guess his mom had remarried, or was it his dad had remarried? Anyway, he had 2 wives, and with the 2 wives, he had 37 children.
Oh, right.
Wow, my God.
Different story, yeah.
Did he ever leave the house?
Wow.
From the sound of things.
This one here is the Confession of Edward W. Hawkins, I guess is what the name of it was.
Yeah, that was the second story in the book. He was from Estill County, Kentucky.
Right.
And he murdered at least 2 people. I think he admitted to 3, but we know that he killed at least 2 people, a sheriff and a deputy who were trying to bring him in. But the really funny part, funny in a dark sort of way, was he was a super bigamist. He married something like 9 women, one after the other.
Right, and this was all in a short amount of time, over 1 year period, kind of, because he would stay with one for maybe a couple months, and he'd run to another town and met one there, and he was getting married to him in 3, 4, 5 days. I mean, it wasn't taking long at all.
Yeah.
You're right. He
was
get married
what,
almost
21? He was only like 21 years old when all this happened.
I think he was only 20 or 21 when he was hanged.
Right. He was 21. Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, he must have been quite a playboy. He must have been quite a looker.
Well,
Wow.
I think he took a lot of that from the way his dad did. I mean, his dad was, even though he had 2 wives, he still had children from other women.
Right, and I could find no divorce records, so it appears he was actually married to both of them at the same time. So,
and they had 2 houses right next to one another.
so apparently
What?
neither of the wives minded sharing the guy.
Good
Quite a
grief.
story. Like I say in the book, it's good to pay everyone a compliment, so at least Hawkins wasn't lazy.
Yeah.
No. I mean, he had quite a reputation. I mean, he was, my goodness, what did they say that he was involved in? Forgeries? And
he did everything.
counterfeiting?
He was a counterfeiter and a pickpocket.
My goodness.
And all kinds of things. Just a one-man crime, a horse thief.
He had joined the
In fact,
army.
I
He
think
joined.
horse thievery is what he was actually being arrested for when he killed the sheriff and the deputy.
Right.
Oops.
Was that the first 2 murders that he had committed, or that he killed?
I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've read it. Those were 2 that he killed for sure, but when he wrote his memoirs in prison, he dropped a few hints that he killed someone, I think, in Kansas.
Right. I believe he did.
And I don't know that it was ever proved.
No.
But we know he killed at least 2.
And all the wives I think he had 7. He had married 7 women, and he had 2 others that he was trying to marry, and he never divorced any of them.
Right, and he was engaged to one.
Yeah.
Now,
So-
wait a minute. He
So
would
wait,
do the
you had
let's do
7
the
wives.
math here. He was hung when he was 20 or 22, something like that.
Right.
So he must, and 37 children.
No.
You figure.
His dad's
Well, that
one
was
that had the
father.
37 children.
I
Oh,
was
he
going to
was
say.
one of 37 siblings.
Right.
I was going to go. Wow.
I know.
Now, that would have been a real record.
But
Yeah.
I think that
His dad must have come from St. Ives.
That Hollywood lifestyle in Kentucky, Estill County in 1830s.
It seems kind of strange that he would be able to do that and everybody not really start talking and let everybody know, hey, this person is married to this person. Oh, this is my husband.
it wasn't in the same place. He was marrying
Yeah.
these women in different states and towns.
Yeah.
He was smart enough. He'd marry one and steal her money,
Yeah.
and then or steal a horse or something, and then he'd ride off to another town, and then he'd marry another one. So none of them had the slightest idea he was married so many times.
Yeah. And that
Was
took
he-
place within 2 years, because that's when he actually started doing that stuff. He was like 18, I think it was.
I think so.
Yeah.
I have to wonder whether or not he was just really silver-tongued or if he was really good-looking.
He was
I'd love
supposedly
what he looked
good looking. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the accounts said he was good looking, but of course, I don't think there are any pictures of him anywhere. So 1857, that's when he died, when he was hanged.
Yeah.
I thought it was the 1830s.
Yeah, he joined the army and went to somewhere in Kansas, I believe it was. And he got tired of doing whatever he was there in the army. He just left and went somewhere else. So he was wanted by the army, and then he started doing things to where he was being wanted in different cities and stuff, from horse stealing to then he started murdering. I forget how many. Was it 3 or 4 people he actually murdered?
2 for sure,
2.
possibly 3.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, possibly 4. He would drop some hints, but I don't know that they ever followed up on it and proved that he actually did some of them.
Well,
He sounded like a typical narcissist, where he was just so full of himself that he figured, well, I can get away with it. I've done it once. Let's try it again. And, well, then let's try it again.
Somebody needs to do a study on this guy, really.
Oh,
So
that
he's
would be interesting.
the
Wow.
Warren Beatty American Gigolo sort of guy. He obviously didn't have a job, it would seem to me.
No, I
Except,
don't think so. Just faking his way through life, pretending to be an army recruiter and stealing money from women that he married and their parents.
wow.
Yeah, Dr. Phil would love to get a hold of this guy.
Well, after he was in jail, convicted in the trial, before he was actually hung, he had time to write his biography, and that's called The Confessions of Edward W. Hawkins. Now, I don't know if you could still find a copy in print somewhere, but it's got to be an interesting read. Because he goes,
oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
he tells a lot of stuff that you didn't have time to look up, I'm sure.
Oh, he really it's really quite a tale.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any original copies from 1857 left, but it was a popular work, and it was reprinted many times. So you can actually find some later editions of it.
Right. I think
I've actually found a copy of it, not from the original 1857, but I found a copy that had been reprinted years later.
Wow. I didn't even try
I
to
think
look.
that Edward, one thing that I thought was interesting was that he said something as he was being led to the gallows, and he had an interesting thing that he said. I thought it was, rather prophetic. He said not to fall in with bad company and warn women not to fall in love with deceitful men. I mean, excuse me, how in the world are women supposed to know that? But I guess he was just saying,
That's one of the
be
questions they
warned.
put down. So are you a deceitful man?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
It occurs to me though, like they say, no news is good news. That if somebody was a stand-up comic only doing gallows humor, wouldn't they be up Liberty Gibbet?
I love gallows humor. I really do. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Oh, I love gallows and inappropriate humor. I love it.
Oh, my books are just loaded with examples of people unearthing witticisms at the last minute before heading for the electric chair or the gallows.
Yeah,
Was there a guy who literally his last name was Fry or something like that, and he literally was saying, he said, "Here's your newspaper article," and he had some weird take on it that indicated he was being fried.
Fried or something like that.
Oh no. Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, I did kind of get two of them mixed up, or I kind of jumped over. That first one about strange murders in Kentucky, you had we was talking about Isaac Disha. He escaped the noose 5 different times, and he was in jail the whole time. But it's because his dad was the governor, and every time the jury was coming back with a guilty verdict, they was finding loopholes, and he would end up getting a retrial. He ended up getting, I don't know how many retrials he had. Was it 5 times?
Well, if I remember correctly, he had 4 retrials, and then he finally escaped prison and went to Texas. I don't remember if he was legally freed or if he broke jail. But he ended up dying, I think, of natural causes in Texas.
Right. Well, after he got out, though, before he went down there, I guess somebody had tried to kill him, shot him or something like that, or beat him. And they ended up having he tried to kill himself. That's what it was. And there was a doctor, and they put a sleeve in his windpipe or something like that.
Yeah, he cut his own throat, and in order to breathe and eat, they had to put a silver tube in his throat. And when he went to Texas, it just so happened he ran into a guy from Kentucky who remembered that Disha's son had a silver tube in his throat.
Right.
So he was his own tracheotomy, kind of?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
primitive tracheotomy.
Yep. Well, back then, that was probably new in doctoring, I guess you might say.
Well, thinking outside the box, probably.
State of the art at the time.
Oh, now these murders and stuff like this all took place in Kentucky, and most of them was in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. Do you come across things like this in more modern times, mid to a little later 1900s?
Yeah, I do. I sort of have a cutoff date. I don't really write about anything that happened after 1939.
Okay.
I just figure 1940 is a good cutoff date because if you go any later than that, you're generally going to still see some people who are related to
Right.
victims and killers, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I don't want to make any of them upset, so I figure if I write about things that happened farther back, then maybe I won't upset anybody, although it does still happen sometimes.
Well, I thought you chose 1939 because it had the best movies that year.
Oh, they did, didn't they?
Yeah, you had Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz, all that stuff.
Stagecoach, Wuthering Heights.
All right, Barbara. I'll be quiet for a while.
No, I just find the whole idea fascinating, and the fact that people were so industrious in methods that they found to kill people. The hydrochloric acid story, for example, where not only did they burn out the poor person's eyes, but they forced him to drink it.
That was a pretty horrifying little tale, especially since they never caught who did it.
Name of that one, what I believe, was the Acid Assassin.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. I have a copy right here.
This wasn't the founder of Sizzler, I guess, right?
No, no.
Let's see, that was in Lewis County, 1897.
And it's just the fact that, well, they thought maybe a chemist did it, correct? That was their prime suspect, was a gentleman who was didn't like who I guess the daughter was marrying or something to that effect.
Civil engineer and a chemist, you're right.
Yeah.
And a former business partner.
Right. That's what it was. Yeah.
It's like, geez, folks.
I mean, how obvious could you get?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, you're aware of what to use, and I guess, you
wore a
use what
disguise.
you know was normal.
The disguise fell off, so that didn't help any.
Right. Well, his daughter, the guy's daughter, was trying to help him. And I don't know if he was fighting with her or what after he'd made the guy drink the poison, but his wig fell off, or beard or something like that, fake beard. And that's when he ran.
Why? The guy couldn't see him.
Yeah, that's very true.
I mean,
think he probably would have been suspect number one even without the disguise.
Probably.
well, you have to also figure out, did the disguises really fool anybody in those days?
It's
you
hard
knew-
to find a case where they did.
You'd recognize the speech, obviously, and there's probably facial recognition that they were using. Hard to get away with that sort of stuff.
I'm sure it must have worked sometimes, but it's amazing how often it didn't work.
Just it amazes me that, I mean, you find there was another story about a man who killed a woman who was getting married, I think, the following Tuesday, and the guy was rather brutal.
I believe. I believe the name of that one was The Murdered Maid.
Yes. And she was strangled with a belt, almost to the point of decapitation.
Ah,
Was that Murdered Maid, or was that that might have been the Big Toe story? The guy who was
It was
caught
Big
because
Toe.
he was
It
barefoot.
was.
They had a deformed toe, and they figured out it was
Yes.
him by his foot
Right.
tracks.
Right.
Correct. And I'm thinking, I realize that we have just as deprived people today, but back in those days, you thought that there was to be a little bit more decorum. The murders were simply done by a gun or a hatchet, but people were getting quite inventive.
We always like to think, that in the good old days, people were nicer and they acted better. And you get an old newspaper and look through it and you see people haven't changed at all.
No, no. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
like the Old West did a Saw series or something.
Well, kind of. In this case, he it was quite brutal in the murder from what they were saying. So I have no idea just how badly he accosted this woman.
They often left out details too. It's a funny thing about those old newspapers. They'll be extremely graphic sometimes. And then sometimes there are details that they simply won't go into.
Well, I guess
Victorian-
it's no different than they are today, where the police will withhold a certain amount of information because they don't want people to come up and falsely say, well, I did it, or I know who did it based on this. They withhold a certain amount of information.
Or
Yeah,
they don't want the person
people
that
make
did it to
copycats.
know.
Yeah.
Even back then they did that. They would withhold information to weed out the false confessions.
Well, they did that with Jack the Ripper. They left out information from the public for a long time.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's very true.
But it's interesting, the newspapers seem to elaborate on a lot of different detail, more so than today where it's strictly a news story, and I guess it's due to column size and the amount of stories that they have to fit in. But the detail and the colorful writing that some of these stories have, and the newspapers had, it's amazing. It was more like a novel in itself than just a flat-out newspaper article.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could be very, very detailed. Very.
Well, after all, they didn't have television or anything, so people needed to know what was going on through the works of the writer. And they had to be graphic. They had to be very detailed. And it's unfortunate that sometimes that graphic detail was a bit much for most people, especially,
yeah.
during trials when they
Well,
would
not even in
detail
the
things.
not even in the case of murder, but even if a goat got into a garden and knocked over a watering can, it seemed to be quite a graphic novel by the time it got to the newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did things very creatively. They were good writers. I've always said that the American editors of the 19th century were some of the best writers that the country's ever had. And that's even in small towns.
Well, that's what always amazed me was that kind of writing is what perpetuated aspects of history. I mean, everybody's heard of the Pony Express, but most people don't know it only ran for like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, that's it. Until the
Telegraph.
come in. Yeah.
But everybody knows of the Pony Express because somehow that just stayed in the public's consciousness because of, I guess, the writers at the time that, I don't know if they made them also into like Penny Dreadful books and stuff like that, but yeah.
They really made heroes out of them in their editorials. And they just stuck in the public imagination even to this very day.
Well, I think
So
one of the things that I really noticed, as far as like tiny little blurb that they had in the local newspaper at the time for the Jenny Bowman trial, and the details and everything. When it came down to it, there wasn't a great deal really put in the newspapers, but when they did, it was just this tiny little thing right in the middle of a huge page of newspaper about who they thought may have been involved in everything. Yet the wording in that tiny little article really made you think. I mean, I'm looking at it and I thought, oh, wow. There really isn't a whole lot of detail here, but it really sparked my imagination. And after that, then other small articles would come out. And so I definitely agree. I think the writers back then, they had this flair for being able to take murders and crimes and everything and putting them together and just really making the reader look at it. And then sometimes they can even come to their own conclusions based on just that tiny little bit that they put out there.
Well, they could make anything interesting, but give them something like a murder or an accident or a suicide, and you could just see them rubbing their hands because it gave them a chance to really be graphic and detailed and wax poetic if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, we got about 2 minutes before we go to break, so don't stop now.
Okay.
Now, Kevin, when it comes down to looking at various different articles, you said that you look at newspapers.com. Is there any other source that you look to find a lot of these stories that you put in your books?
I actually prefer newspapers on microfilm over newspapers.com, which is great if you know exactly what you're looking for to begin with. But sometimes I'll look at court records. Sometimes you'll find some things on ancestry.com that'll fill in some clues and things like that. Sometimes county histories. You can find a lot of information from county histories and courthouse records even.
Right. Now, do you actually go into the courthouses and into the registries, or do you just look them up online?
Usually I look them up online because I just don't really have time to go looking in person, but I have done it a few times.
Yeah, I was going to say it's good to see an academic writing because your bibliography is longer than some people's chapters.
Oh, I want people to know where all the information's coming from.
The bibliography is long.
That way they'll see where it's all, I don't make up anything. None of it's fiction at all. I don't have that good an imagination.
Oh, I disagree with you on that. I really do. I don't think that you have, a classic mind. I think you definitely have an imagination, and I think that's because of the way you write and the interest that you have. You can't write about the things that you do and not have an imagination. So, no, I definitely disagree with you on that one.
It could be just telling factual information in a creative way, but I don't think I could make up a story, invent characters, invent dialogue, and things of that nature. Of course,
we'll see if you come out with a book. Try writing a book. We'll definitely read it.
Say I will.
When I'm writing my screenplays, my characters do most of my work. It's like I'm taking dictation. So you might want to give that a try. Just have your characters have a dialogue and let them do the talking.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah, because you have more murders in your books than Jessica Fletcher.
Wow. All right.
Oh, well, it's true.
No, Henry,
think of all the ways you can murder someone.
Every time she stepped outside, she found a body.
I know. That's the worst town to live in. Okay. Plus, if you go to Universal Studios, they have a shark right in the water there in our town.
So all those
Henry, I was
murders
gonna
that she
say-
was around and nobody suspected her.
Exactly. Yeah.
No.
There was a parody film back in the 80s with John Ritter and Pam Dauber that spoofed a lot of television shows that apparently were being beamed out of hell, for sure. And during the ending credits, they had a montage of different titles of shows that were on Hell TV, and one of them was Murder She Liked.
I like that one.
But Henry, I was going to say, we've only literally been on for about 30 minutes. If you want to hold off for maybe 15, 20 minutes, that'll be more of the halfway point for the break.
Yeah, we can go till about a quarter after, 20 after, something like
Yeah,
that.
there
It'll
you
be fine.
go. Kevin, I don't know if you're aware of it, but I've been putting the shows, the audio shows, onto YouTube, onto a Paranormal View channel. I'll put the link in the report page and such. But Henry had actually started one some years ago, and then I completely forgot he had done that. So I started a new one, and then I was doing a search for it. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, oh, that's right. Henry has about 4 or 5 shows up already.
Yeah,
But
that was all.
there's
So.
no way to merge them, so I just kept on going. So
Yeah.
I started from back when COVID pretty much started, and been going from there. I'm up to December of last year.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very good to know.
He just started that, and well, I'm probably going to transfer the ones that I've got up there over to his channel because he's got a whole lot of them already posted, and I didn't post but about 3 or 4. So I can do that, and we won't have but one channel then.
Yeah.
But we got the link for it. We'll be posting all that stuff if people want to go on to YouTube and like our page and listen to old shows right off of there. And
Okay.
with
Send me
that-
the link, and I'll make sure that I mention it on my Facebook author page and my my website.
Okay.
I'll put it in the, well, I'll send it to you on Facebook, but I'll also put it in the chat so that it can be put into the chat room, our live chat room on para-x.com. So there we go.
Okay, and Kevin, we got a question in the chat room for you, and that is wants to know if you covered the murders of Roy Rickey and in 1932 and Stella Kenny in 1915 in any of your books.
No, I haven't. Are those Kentucky cases?
They are both took place in Olive Hill, Kentucky.
I haven't written about them, but it's very possible that I have something about them in my files, because the way I do this is I go through old Courier journals on microfilm, and I just go through day-by-day issues and take notes on stories that sound like they might be good to write about, and I'll write down names and dates and page numbers. So it could be that that's something in my files that I just haven't gotten around to doing yet, but generally speaking, I have pretty good records on a lot of murder cases from Kentucky, not just Kentucky, but all over the U.S. I don't just write about Kentucky, but everywhere.
Right.
And so I have a lot of good records on these things.
Yeah, you've got
Look,
you've got books from quite a few different states, which has interesting stories from them.
yeah, the next one coming out, 2 are from Indiana University, coming out later this fall. One in September is Murder in Old Kentucky, which was my first real true crime book, and it's been out of print for a while because the publisher went out of business. It's being reprinted with new chapters. And then in October is one covering the whole Midwest. So Kentucky, but also Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, etc. So not just Kentucky, but everywhere.
Very interesting. Of course, that means you'll have to be on about 6, 7, 8 more times.
Well, I would love to. I always have such a good time on here.
This is my first time, Kevin, so I would be more than happy to ask you a whole lot more questions. When you come out with additional books, and I will definitely be looking to a few of your other ones in the meantime.
Well, yeah, that's not even including the ones about ghosts and strange deaths and that sort of thing, giant skeletons,
Great.
etc.
Oh, you did mention ghosts in one of these.
Woohoo!
Oh yeah. Go. Okay. Go.
Oh yeah, one of them ended
ghosts.
with a ghost story. So if you can do true crime and fit in a ghost story too, to me that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
See, I had it wrote down in here somewhere.
Yeah, it was Jenny Bowman. She was a maid who was murdered by burglars in
Right.
Louisville
Right.
in 1882, I think it was. But the house where it happened is long gone. But the residents of the street say that they see a young lady in Victorian maid's outfit sometimes on the sidewalk. And they beat her with fireplace pokers. And one person who lives on the street said that his fireplace pokers will sometimes form into a cross shape.
Huh.
Creepy.
Mm.
Wow. Yeah, that. I think she's walking up down the street trying to find a house because that house is torn down. It's no longer there.
Right, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? She's still trying to find the house, maybe.
Yeah.
But if she's a ghost actually living back in that time, don't you think that the image of the house would still be there for her?
Maybe.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's what people on the street claim. So
Hey, I'm not going to dispute it.
I wonder if they even know about the story of the maid that was murdered. Because if they know the story and they're seeing a lady in a maid costume, you could always say, oh, well, they're having a delusion based on knowing the story. But if they've never heard the story and they see the ghost in the maid's clothes, then you kind of have to say, well, it's very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. There's got to be some credence to it. Validity to it, based on what they're seeing. And she was a rather interesting case anyway. I thought it was interesting from a more modern forensic point of view. When initially she claimed that there were two attackers, and then it turned out that the one person that had actually struck her, that caused her to die, he claimed at the very end that no, he did it alone, that there wasn't anybody else with him, that the person that he was arrested with or alongside of had nothing to do with it. And that man maintained his innocence all the way up until the time he was hanged.
Yeah,
So-
they were both hanged.
But it was just kind of sad that she claimed that there were two people involved, yet she really only saw one, and yet two people were hanged for it. And nowadays they tell you that you really can't rely a lot on facial recognition or memory, especially in a traumatic situation. And
Yeah.
the fact that she was struck and she was out of it, and she really couldn't identify the person. All she could just give vague description of who this person was. And the fact that she thought that there may have been two of them, and right at the very end, no, the person that actually did the crime admitted he did it alone, and the other person was innocent, but nobody cared. They just hung him anyway.
Yeah. It was especially difficult in her case because she undoubtedly suffered some kind of brain damage because they kept hitting her with pokers, or and she kept changing her story. Sometimes she said it was two, sometimes she said it was one.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll probably never know exactly what happened, but it is true. One of them maintained his innocence right up to the very last minute,
Yeah.
and the other one confessed.
Wow.
Yeah. Even back then, they didn't really look at all the facts. It's like even today, a woman gets killed and the first thing they think of is, well, it's got to be the husband or it's got to be the boyfriend. They don't really look anywhere else. The first place they look is one particular person. And she just happened to be that way. And that could be another reason why she haunts, is that she went through such trauma being killed. Well, she lingered for a period of time after she was beaten. And I don't know, perhaps her spirit realized, well, here she accused two people of what happened, but only one was actually involved. It's a sad situation. Perhaps she's haunting because not only because she ended up dying from her injuries, but the fact that one person, an innocent person, was actually tried, convicted, and executed for something they didn't do.
It's a very interesting thought.
Wow.
Well, I mean, the other offshoot of this is one of them was trying to protect the other for one reason or another, and both of them did it. So, I mean, modern day forensics would solve that case, but back then, you pretty much had to rely on
What people say.
the victim and the onlookers. So
Exactly.
But most
Yes.
people, like the old saying of, there are no atheists in foxholes, to maintain your innocence right up to that last pull the lever, that's got to be something. I think I read in a couple of Ripley's Believe It or Nots that some people who have gone to be executed, swearing their innocence, would literally say, "I will, to prove I didn't do it, no grass will grow on my grave, and no grass would." So I would like stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the one person that was falsely accused, he told this other person, because apparently they were led to the gallows together, and the one that was innocent looked over at the other one and said, "Well, look, when I get to the gates of heaven and everything," he says, "you pretty much better not be there, because I'm innocent. I deserve to go through. You don't," sort of thing.
Now
I
we
thought
just
that
want
was
to see
interesting. So how can you not believe that he was innocent if he's going to say something like that?
now I want to see a Heaven Gate SmackDown.
A grudge match.
Yep.
Exactly. St. Peter's like, guys, we have a line here.
Wow.
So, are there a lot of cases where you find follow-up stories saying, well, we killed this guy, but somebody else did it, and we caught them, and they confessed?
Not very many. Surprisingly few. It has happened, though.
Was it mostly like a guilty conscience thing?
Typically so, yeah. But then you have a lot of people who confess to things that they didn't really do for some reason or another, wanting notoriety, or people do lots of crazy things. Sometimes I think we'll just never know the truth.
No. Not at all.
Well, there
mean,
must
that-
be a whole file of cases that you found that were unsolved to this day, correct?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I write
probably no way
a number of historical true crime books, and they're about half and half solved and half unsolved.
Okay.
I don't know what people like better, a story with a definite ending or a story that lets them speculate and guess.
Wow.
No, I think you should come out with another book about the ones that were unsolved. I think there's a lot of people that would rather sit there and scratch their head at the end of the chapter going, "Oh, well, I wonder what the heck," and kind of come to their own conclusions.
There's so many stories like that, too.
I think we're going to go ahead and take us a quick break. It's not going to be a very long one tonight because we got lots more to talk about. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and take a break. And let's see, Jeff, you want to take us out real quick? Let me get ready here first.
Exactly. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and Tabby Cat Gash, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, and tonight's guest author, Keven McQueen. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the brief break.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para-X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para-X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Parax Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one. Tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan. Maybe.
If I can unmute my microphone, yes. Here.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we have Tabby Cat.
How you doing?
All right. Now, speaking of listeners from around the world, where do we have listeners at tonight?
The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, India, and unknown, along with Australia.
Along with India. That we haven't seen them for a while.
Yes.
All right. That's
Welcome
good.
back.
And we have with us tonight our great guest, who all we have to do is point him in one direction and let him talk.
Looks like we're going into a genealogy thing.
Keven McQueen. You are with us, right?
I'm here.
Oh,
I am
okay.
with you.
Ooh, so now a big question comes, Kevin. Have you ever done any research and found one of your own relatives in the stories?
No, I haven't found any relatives through research. I actually did have a cousin who was executed back in the 90s.
Ah,
Not a close cousin, something like a third cousin, but I did have a relative who was one of the last people, in fact, that Kentucky's ever executed.
Oh,
Wow.
what had he been convicted of?
Well, he shot a convenience store clerk during a robbery.
Oops. Yeah, that'll get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good. No.
Nope.
I know they was talking about one of the commercials I just played, UFOs. He said it was a great commercial that I just played. And I think it's in June we have Mac Maloney and them going to be on. Him and One. So that ought to be an interesting show. We'll let you know when that happens. So,
So, I mean, you haven't done any UFO stories there, have you?
I actually have not done any UFO stories. I've done some stories about weird things dropping out of the sky.
really?
But I haven't done out-and-out UFO stories.
So you mean like Fortean events?
Fortean, yes, exactly.
Oh.
Wow.
Huh.
Well, now,
Like
Because you
birds,
you've never heard before him?
meteors, what?
No, Fortean, Charles Fort was a researcher who would
Yes, I
document-
know who Charles Fort is. I wonder what was falling out of the sky.
The listeners might not.
Well, I have a book called, oh gracious, I can't even remember the name, Forgotten Tales of Kentucky, with a whole chapter on weird things that fell from the sky. The most fascinating one was allegedly a rain of knitting needles over Harrodsburg, Kentucky.
Uh,
And what makes that really interesting for me is no one seems to really know exactly when it happened, but everybody in town agrees that it did happen. And I have found old newspaper accounts from people, newspaper editors in town, for example, claiming that they actually had some of the knitting needles that fell. And yet no one seems to know the date. So one thing I'm hoping by doing my day-by-day researches through the old Courier Journal and microfilm is to finally nail it down and see when this happened.
Well, that story will leave you
there
in
were some
stitches.
people who, were figuring that it's one thing to have knitting needles, but it's another to, have pearls.
Yeah.
Oh, boo.
well,
Kevin, I was just looking at this book, The Forgotten Tales of Kentucky, There's a Loch Ness monster there?
There is a lake monster. It hasn't been seen in, probably since the 1960s. But for a while there, it was seen fairly often.
Wow.
Actually, I think there were two in different places.
Wow.
Which lakes?
One of them, I wish I had the book with me and I could tell you.
Was it? I think it says Owensboro?
One was in
Owensboro?
Owensboro, right, and the other one I think was somewhat near Lexington, not at Lexington, but somewhat near it. I know a UK faculty member had a home there, so I'm assuming he didn't commute really far.
Yeah.
Now, if I had the book handy, I could tell you, but I don't have it right with me.
Okay. And another thing that I thought was interesting, unidentified flying people. Not unidentified flying objects, but unidentified flying people?
Yeah, flying humanoids is not exactly uncommon.
Well, I mean, we've had witches that fly, but unidentified flying people?
These are people.
Clark
These are
Kent.
figures that are seen that almost look like not. They don't even fly like Superman. They fly almost like they're standing up, but just floating along.
Was that in the Forgotten Tales of Kentucky book?
Yes.
That may be the only out-and-out UFO, now that I think about it, an object, that's unidentified and flying, to be really technical about it. But that was in the 1880s, I think. And it's a fairly famous event, actually. And I think Charles Ford did cover it in one of his books. The New York Times mentioned it because it was seen over Brooklyn and a few other states as well, but it apparently originated in Kentucky. No one ever figured out quite what it was, but a lot of witnesses says that it looked like a guy in a flying machine.
Huh.
So my guess it was Venus or something like that, but you had a lot of pretty interesting testimony about it.
Wow. I had no idea that so many interesting stories could, had come out of Kentucky. I guess I'm a little bit uneducated or something, but there's 50 states,
Oh,
so
well, I
there's
didn't
got to
know
be
it either.
interesting things coming out of each one. But
That sounds Kentuckyist.
yeah, I know.
No, I didn't know it either until I started going through the old papers, which was another thing Charles Fort used to do, was go through all the old newspapers looking for these kinds of stories. So, you hear these great ghost stories and they're told in the papers and then they're forgotten. So unless you go through the papers looking for them, they're going to stay hidden forever.
Wow.
So lots of good stories from every state, but a lot of them are, pretty well buried until someone just happens to find them.
Well, now,
Cool.
I guess if you was going to kill someone, you'd want to do it in Mercer County.
Why is that got better discount rates or something?
No, there's a story there though. Your story about never tease an angry sheriff.
Well, that goes without saying forever.
Well, I guess
Trying to remember the details there.
it was the doctor that the sheriff. I guess the doctor was renting a place from him and his wife, and it ended up to where some reason or another the doctor didn't like him, and the sheriff had been up for re-election and lost.
Oh, right. And I think on his last day in office, he shot the doctor in front of all these witnesses, and he still managed to get off.
Yep. Said it was in
it's coming back.
self-defense.
All right, I feared for my life. So
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting story. I mean, he had witnesses against him and all, but he tried to say that he thought the guy was going for his gun or something like that. And I think the first shot hit him in the back.
I think he was shot in the back, just
Yeah.
like we were talking about before the show began.
Yep. Shot in the back, and then he turned around. He shot him 2 more times. But
now that you're looking at me, make sure this gets done right.
But that was pretty interesting. I thought it was. That I don't know if he actually got off because he was a sheriff, or ex-sheriff then. But I don't know how the witnesses stacked up against him. But if they could get him off, they could get anybody off, I guess. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Pretty crazy story.
There was one that I thought that was pretty interesting, and I'll let you tell the whole story. It was called the Fatal Barnyard Fowl Impersonation.
Oh, that's a story that I actually have kind of a personal connection to, because it happened in the county where I grew up, in Jackson County. So when I describe the tombstone, I've actually seen it. And the story goes, and in order for the story to make sense, the thing to remember is that now the symbols for the parties are Democratic donkey, Republican elephant, but in the 1890s it was Republican raccoon and Democratic rooster. So if you go to the newspapers, whenever Democrats won an election, you'd see cartoons of roosters crowing. And if Republicans won, you'd see drawings of raccoons. So the story doesn't make any sense unless you know that, but the story is that Jackson County was highly Republican at the time, and it was during an election, which in Kentucky was traditionally a time of violence anyway. I've probably got 100 stories of election violence from back in the day. And one of the very few people in the county who was a Democrat cast his vote, and instead of being quiet about it, he came out and cock-a-doodle-dooed like a rooster, which infuriated everyone around him, and he got shot full of holes.
Wow.
I think he may have been the only person in history to ever get killed for doing a rooster impersonation. So there's his claim to fame there.
Guess he really cocked it up.
Well, that was pretty interesting that instead of Republican and Democrats, they were called roosters and raccoons.
And not only that, his tombstone is pockmarked with bullets, so whoever was mad at him kept shooting a stone after he died.
Oh, that's rude.
And that's why you keep your vote to yourself.
Very interesting.
Then
Yeah.
there's another book topic right there, which is
Election
violence in the in the 1900s.
Well, they had a lot of stuff like that down in Kentucky because back in them hills, you had moonshiners, and I mean, you didn't want to go around their stills; you get shot.
Yep.
Well, there's a lot of examples of election violence that really don't have anything to do with politics, because in those days, people used to shoot off cannons and things at elections, and it's just incredible the number of accounts I've got of people who got killed blowing themselves up with cannons or losing an arm or something.
Wow.
I
Just
guess that's
because
no
they're
different than
campaign-
idiots doing it with fireworks today, holding on to Roman candles and getting their fingers blown off.
Oh, yeah. It definitely happened a lot.
Mm.
Yeah, there are probably a lot more cannons back there too. Well, I mean, you think probably they were remnants of some war that they were shooting off, the cannons, and they probably were a little bit more available back then. But they were probably the most liable to misfire.
Yeah, I wonder, where were they getting cannons from? But of course, this would have been after the Civil War, and maybe some people just actually had some leftover cannons. Another thing they used to do, which I mention in one of my upcoming books later this year, is they used to fire off anvils. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Henry. Have you heard of this?
No.
They would take an anvil and they'd coat it with gunpowder on top. And then they'd put another anvil on top of it, and they'd set off the gunpowder and see how high up in the air the top anvil would fly.
God.
It's called anvil launching, actually. There are a lot of YouTube videos about that. I've seen them.
Oh, they still do that?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I had
thought
never
that
heard of
must have
it.
been- Yeah, you'll find a lot of accounts of people getting hurt during those, too.
Well, if you're standing in the wrong spot, I guess.
Something very Wile E. Coyote about it, watching an anvil fly up in the air and hoping it won't hit you when it comes down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, flying projectiles are big. But an anvil. Wonder how they picked an anvil to do that.
Oh my goodness.
I guess because they're so heavy.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because it's so because it's so heavy that it's like, hey, let's see if we can defy physics.
You make it go, yeah.
I guess a lot of farms back there, and you would have an anvil around just to
Well,
pound out
in October they have festivals where people build homemade trebuchets and launch pumpkins.
Oh, yeah. That's another thing that you would think would have been out of fashion forever, but it's still around.
All right. Yet another one I thought was pretty interesting. On page 100, it was a corpse in the closet.
It really does sound like something from a nightmare, doesn't it?
Yeah. Sounds like a gothic horror story.
Yeah, it was about a grocer who, let's see, committed suicide in Louisville. And then after he died, they found a trap door in his store, and there was a body inside it.
And who was the body from? Was it his girlfriend or a neighbor? Or I forget what it was.
It was a woman he claimed was his wife, but they weren't actually married.
Ah. That's what I thought.
But trapdoors back then would have been a little bit more commonplace just for illegal alcohol, correct?
Yeah, they would have had, I guess, just for storage. I know they used to have little storage bins like that for potatoes underground, so maybe stores did too. I know that farmers did.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess it would have been a lot cooler to keep everything in the basement or like a root cellar of some sort, right?
Oh, root cellar, thank you. That's exactly the phrase I was
Yes.
looking for.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mrs. Bates held out so long.
Oh.
I know the house that my grandma lived in when she first got married over in Manchester. They lived right next to a creek that come down out of their hills, and they had a little, like a dugout next to right there at the creek where they would keep their milk and cheese and different things like that to keep it cool from the water. They didn't have a refrigerator back then, but that's what they used for it. They was
Now-
all. Go ahead.
Sorry. Kevin, being an author and of the various different books and everything that you've had out, you've had history, you've had the supernatural, just general paranormal and everything. Is there one particular genre that you really prefer or really are more interested in or excites you the most? What particular topic?
I'm not really sure that any of them really stand out as a favorite. One thing I've discovered is that you can sometimes combine these things. You can have historical, true crime with paranormal overtones.
Mm-hmm.
And I always contend that any of these books, with their stories about supernatural events or murders, historical events, just anything, will tell you a little something about history that you can't necessarily get from a history book. And you'll learn a lot about former customs and how people thought and what they did just from reading these stories. So I guess they're all kind of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just having this discussion too, how one-dimensional a lot of history books seem to be, and that they'll give you facts and dates, but they really don't go into the mindsets of some of the events that happen. And your book is nice that way because it does. You talk about the community and what they were thinking and what they were saying, and it gets a little bit more personal and three-dimensional when you start looking at history from a newspaper point of view rather than a history book point of view.
I think you're right. And thank you, by the way. I've always said that if you read a boring history book, the author didn't do his job right. It should not be boring.
Well, now you had a story in here, and the title of it is "What Came of Stealing Some Quilts."
I'm trying to remember the details. I do know someone ended up getting hanged. Not for stealing quilts, I add quickly, but for murdering a couple of peddlers who were... I can't quite remember all the details. I haven't read this one in a while. But it seems like someone stole some quilts from a couple of peddlers in Easterm Kentucky. And one thing happened, it snowballed, and finally someone ended up getting hanged for killing the peddlers. But it all started when someone stole quilts.
I was going to say that's a pretty strict sentence for quilt theft.
And I don't think she was ever punished for it.
Wow.
So she stole some quilts, and it all snowballed into 2 murders and a hanging.
Wow.
No, don't steal quilts.
Well, I mean, that's sort of like a good film noir story right there. You know, someone steals a quilt, it ends up in murder. The person who steals a quilt never gets charged for it, but something else happens. You know, it's film noir. A lot of your stories are film noir.
A moral story.
I'm sure they used to be able to entrap them by, a sting operation. Spelling bees.
Wow.
It's kind of a moral story in a way when you think about it. It goes to show that some little thing you do that you think is harmless and fun might end up having severe repercussions.
Yeah, exactly.
So little bitty crime like that's more or less shoplifting could lead to something much, much worse.
You really want to be worried when the police are blanketing the area.
Jeff, you're full of them tonight.
I'm full of them most of the time. I just don't open and get a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Our time is quickly going by, and if people like these kind of stories, you can go to Amazon and look up Keven McQueen and look at all his books. Order 3 or 4 of them. They're very interesting. He does books just on certain states sometimes. Sometimes he'll group a state. The topics will be a little different times. But they're real interesting because he does a lot of research on them. And it's like you had one in here called The Perfect Murders. And it's the murders of Lillian Patrick and Mary Magdalene Pitts.
Oh, yeah, those are pretty horrible stories, actually, those two. Basically, they're abuse murders of children. And that was actually a story disturbing enough that I didn't really want to tell it, but the publisher of the book, the publisher is located in the town where that happened. We're very close to it, and they said, well, we'd really like to have that story in the book, so I agreed to do it, but that's one I always found a bit uncomfortable telling.
And yet it's part of the title of the book.
Yeah.
I was when I do my report, I come up with different links, and I'll have the entire title lower down when I list all your books, so you can go to the report page and you'll see all the links to all of his books on Amazon. But sometimes when I'm mentioning it earlier, I'll just say, cruelly murdered. And I thought, well, I took the name and I did a quick search. and I found essentially find a grave came up, and I didn't realize that this is a 3.5-year-old child that had been killed.
Yeah, well, a lot of these
That
older
is so sad.
stories, murder cases, if you have the right kind of sense of humor, you'll always find some bizarre or strange little twist that's almost humorous in a gallows humor, dark sort of way. But this is one where you just couldn't find anything like that. So, story told reluctantly, but it's in the book. It was requested.
Well, that's good. I mean, somebody takes a real case like that and requests that it's done because they know about it. That's pretty interesting.
Well, and it is a really pretty famous case, too. So,
Where did
it's
that take place at?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Where did it take place at?
Oh, this was, give me a moment. It's way out in Easterm Kentucky, and the county escapes me. We have 120 counties.
Right.
Which is, I think, almost more than any state except Texas or a couple others, and it's really hard for me to keep them all straight. But I'll flip through it. I'll find it.
Okay. In the meantime, what about the case of the killer coroner?
Oh, that was a Louisville case where, usually the coroner is the person who investigates murders. This coroner actually committed one. In
Convenient.
an argument with a neighbor, he shot a teenage boy. Boyd County.
Well, I guess it was easy for him to write out the report then.
I did it.
Yeah. This is exactly how it went down.
3-word account there. Oh no, my mistake. It took place in Greenup County. The chapter is about 2 child murders. The first was in Boyd County, and the second was in Greenup County.
Ah.
That's it. Very
So,
close to where Jesse Stewart's from.
so how was the coroner killing them? I mean, what was the reason for that?
It was a fight between 2 families, almost like a feud. The coroner's family didn't get along with their neighbors, and finally it escalated out of hand, and he ended up shooting the teenage boy from next door, claiming in self-defense, though there is a little doubt about that. But the coroner ended up not going to jail for it. And as I recall, the neighbor lady eventually murdered someone else herself. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wheels within wheels.
It's a wonder that there isn't just a lot of people killing each other back then.
The kind of stuff you wouldn't make up. It's better than fiction, I think, because fiction has to follow certain rules or no one believes it, but life doesn't have to follow rules. So you get all these strange little twists and turns.
Well, it also depends if you're making something that's believable or it's absurdist, like the movie Rubber or the movie Wrong by the same filmmaker.
Well, Kevin, that's a really good point. Do you find people are writing you saying these stories are completely unbelievable? They can't possibly be true. From the simple standpoint, it doesn't follow any of the fiction writing rules.
So far, I haven't. I've got a phrase I like to use, which is real-life surrealism. When people say, well, what are these things like? The true crime stories are just crime, although they sometimes approach absurdist surrealism in certain details. But mostly it's what I call real-life surrealism, meaning it's bizarre and unbelievable and surreal, and yet it actually happened.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty good phrase to cover it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and in a way, I keep bringing up Dostoevsky, but it takes on that really mad psychological turn to a lot of degree that you wouldn't be able to write about, although Dostoevsky did. But these people must have had a really interesting mental state of that they were. Yes.
You have to wonder sometimes.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have all the things that people do nowadays to keep them occupied. And I'm sure that eventually, boredom would get involved, ethics, religion, and so forth, and that would play into it. It's like all those poor people that are housed in like lighthouses, and like a husband and wife, they're housed in a lighthouse for months at a time, just the two of them. And eventually they would just get bored. They would find out all kinds of idiosyncrasies, between the two of them. And eventually one of them, out of boredom and just sheer teedism,
Tedium.
they just snap and they go after the other. And the next thing you know, you're finding out there's a murder involved because they don't have anything better to do. They're tired, sick and tired of somebody gnashing their teeth at breakfast.
Yeah, they called it cabin fever back then.
Or, well, you could read a book, people, like Cruelly Murdered, the murder of Mary Magdalene Pitts and other Kentucky crime stories by Keven McQueen.
Exactly.
Read them all.
Got to do something to cure the boredom.
Right. Well, put any bad ideas in your head. It's just read them.
Yeah.
Well, I think that if anybody read some of these books and realized the consequences of a lot of it, it has that kind of impact. You look at some of these stories going, I really don't like my neighbor that much, but after reading your book, it's like, well, yeah, but there's a line you have to draw.
Thanks, I appreciate that too.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that my neighbor mows half of my lawn when he does it, but I'm not going to go out and shoot him for it.
I try to look for comedy angles whenever I can to keep it from becoming, depressing and that sort of thing. But at the same time, yeah, you can definitely find morals to some of these stories.
Oh, yeah.
Things not to do, as I like to say.
As long as the line you're not drawing is a Y shape across their chest where the autopsy
well, now you had, I guess we probably got time for one more. John Hurst killed Alfred Rader, and Rader's brother vowed revenge. Now, there's a story not just of them trying to kill somebody, but what happened to Rader's brother's wife.
Oh, that's another one that just escalated and escalated. And it ended up in the rather famous hanging of a mountain outlaw called Bad Tom Smith.
Well, you're badass if you're actually called Bad Tom Smith.
Yeah, and that was, everyone called him that, Bad Tom. That's what he was known as. It was one of the feud stories. You always hear Kentucky violence. Immediately you think of feuds. And I haven't done too many feud stories, but this is one that I did do. Two families at war and killing each other. Lots of murders. Finally culminating in a hanging that actually seemed to put a stop to it.
So I like the part about...
Where did they get these names from? I mean, you have to kind of wonder who sat down one day and just started calling him Bad Toms.
I'm not sure,
Stick.
but he really earned it. He probably reveled in it.
Elbows on the table at breakfast. Come on.
That's where it begins.
It always starts there.
Bad table manners.
Gateway activity.
So this other guy that vowed the revenge, he was married and he left his wife. He was a lawyer, wasn't he? And left his wife and stopped doing law, and was going to try to kill him.
His brother,
right?
And ended up a drunken desperado.
But what happened to his wife? She went destitute, and the children. He had 3 children.
Yeah. all for that thirst, because of that thirst for revenge.
Yeah. Well, that's a wild story, you might say, which is interesting. This whole book is good. I mean, if you like to read about people getting killed and what happens to you when you do kill somebody, it's a great little book. Got a lot of stories from
It's
Kentucky.
film noir.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is film noir, where you get these people who just go off and their actions just escalate really downhill fast.
It's Kentucky in the 1800s, but that doesn't mean it's not relevant and we can't learn anything from it. And it doesn't apply to any other places and cultures, because I think it does. I think we can see a lot of ourselves in these old stories.
Yeah, agreed.
Plus, you could always just film it in black and white.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And it'll look
Exactly.
like Kentucky in the 1800s.
Human nature does not change.
Nope.
I'd like to say I'm really thrilled by the fact that you've got listeners tonight from well,
From
everywhere.
Kentucky?
Yeah. Canada, India, unknown places. That's especially interesting.
Well, Ghost Hunter Joe Clark is from Kentucky. He's in the chat room.
Oh. Hi, Joe.
And we have Spain and Poland who are listening as well now.
All right.
Oh,
Hello out there.
We do get out.
Yeah.
That's great. I love coming on here.
Well, I'm thankful.
Well, it's good to have people who are unfamiliar with the United States and history and what have you. And books like these are really good because it's real Americana.
And it's a history. Yes.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, that's as part of Americana as anything else.
Unfortunately, yes.
It's all part of history. It's
Yeah.
there. And you can learn from it.
And be entertained.
And
We
entertained.
have to. Yeah. I mean, a lot of your books are very entertaining. They're not all gloom and doom. Some of them are quite bizarre, like your California book.
Oh, yeah, that's a strange one. They're all strange, but that one's kind of head and shoulders strange.
it's California.
Yeah, it's California. Yeah.
When I moved out to Los Angeles, a friend since passed, I said, "Well, I'm moving to Los Angeles," and he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm an actor." He says, "Yeah, but the country is tilted and all the nuts roll to California."
All right. It's about time for us to kind of like starting to wrap up here. We got less than 2 minutes. So I want to thank you for taking time to be with us tonight. I want you to give out all your information where people can follow you and then
Okay.
stay on till we get off, and then we'll chat with you for a minute.
All right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. One thing I always tell people, if you're looking for me online, my name is spelled Keven McQueen. So if you're looking for Kevin, you won't find me. I have a website, kevinmcqueenstories.com, and I have 2 Facebook pages. One they mentioned earlier, which I call my weird comedy page, Kevin D. McQueen. But Keven McQueen is the author page. And you'll find all sorts of little things there.
All right. Sounds good. Very good. And glad you're
glad
with
to hear
us
from
tonight.
you.
So we are just less than a minute now on the show. And I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. And our crew, Jeff and Barbara and Tabby Cat. You guys do a great job, and we got a lot of things that's going on, so we appreciate it. And I hope you guys enjoy doing the show too. So next week, Tabby, who do we have?
Next week, on May 1st, we have special guest Denise Pridemore. And Denise is associated with the very famous Sally House in Atchison, Kansas, and is currently working at the very beautiful and haunted McPike Mansion in Alton, Illinois. Be
All
sure
right.
to tune in.
All right. Until then, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould?
Barbara Duncan.
We'll see you
Tabby
next
Cat
week.
Gash.
And we'll see you
That'll
next
work.
week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.